What's up guys, it's Johnny Candido of Candido Training HQ. In today's video I want to talk about a topic which I believe has a lot of misconceptions surrounding it, and that is the difference between powerlifting training and bodybuilding training. The first thing a lot of people point to is the rep ranges used, and they'll say that usually bodybuilders work in just the 8 to 12 rep range, focusing on mass, and powerlifters only work in the 1 to 5 rep range, not trying to build muscle but just trying to build strength. And I already have a video on this called High Reps for Strength Training, showing that this really isn't necessarily the truth, that there's a lot of overlap when it comes to rep ranges, and you can't really box it into one specific arbitrary number. What's funny is I've also seen George Lehman, who's one of the strongest men on the planet, basically say the exact same sentiment that I said in my video, where he said that if you get stronger in your 10 rep max, are you not going to get stronger in your 1 rep max? So I'm not entirely denying that there will be a slight difference in rep ranges, but I'm saying that I just don't believe that that's the main point of emphasis that separates bodybuilding from powerlifting. The second point I see brought up is that maybe the rep ranges aren't that different, but the real difference then must be volume. That bodybuilders need to train with a much higher volume to focus on hypertrophy rather than just strength training. And once again, I'm not entirely denying this, but I don't think that you can focus on this being the main difference either. Because if you look at some of these powerlifting programs, especially the ones that the foreign lifters run very often, like Smolov or any other high frequency squatting style training, you'll see that their volume is actually much greater than many bodybuilders. And conversely, there are many bodybuilders who train with a fairly low volume as well. Mike Mentzer and Dorian Yates made it famous to just train with very high intensity but not performing many sets. So once again, I don't believe that we can point towards volume or rep ranges as being the main difference between bodybuilding and powerlifting training. So you're probably wondering what I believe is the main difference, and in my opinion, that is exercise selection. See, a lot of people wonder that if powerlifting is so basic and fundamental to bodybuilding, how come some powerlifters don't look like bodybuilders? And the simple reason, besides genetics, is that you have to look at what the powerlifting movements are focusing on. If you look at it, 2/3 of the lifts are lower body movements, and they're way bigger in terms of how they impact your total because those lifts have a greater potential as far as the amount of weight you can lift. So if you look at it, someone who's going to be a great powerlifter really needs to prioritize lower body training far more than upper body training, generally speaking. So what you'll usually see between two natural lifters is that a powerlifter will actually have a very similar amount of lean body mass. It's just they will look smaller because they're not necessarily worried about developing their upper chest or their biceps or the lateral head of their shoulders. They're not worried about those small details which make you appear much bigger rather than just having big quads, big glutes, and hamstrings. So that's something people seem to not understand, is that exercise selection in bodybuilding is crucial to develop symmetry. See, right now if I was a bodybuilder, my lower body would be way too big in proportion to my upper body. However, as a powerlifter, all I care about is increasing my squat now still moving forward, because not only is that a strength that I can keep improving and it has a strong effect on my total, but also the more I improve my squat, the more my deadlift goes up. So increasing my bench, while it will help greatly to improve on weaknesses, it's just not necessarily as important. So essentially the incentive would be reversed if I was in bodybuilding versus in powerlifting. In bodybuilding, my squat would already be good, I'd be focusing on other things. Where in powerlifting, I want to maximize that to help improve my total as much as possible. The last point I want to make about exercise selection being the main difference between powerlifting and bodybuilding pertains to the limiting factor of an exercise. Whenever you're training a particular movement, there's only going to be one muscle group that is truly the limiting factor, that's the first to be exhausted. And this is the only muscle group that will be developed to its full potential with that exercise. Therefore, when it comes to bodybuilding, you're going to have to perform more movements to fully develop each body part. I'll give an example. Let's say someone's performing stiff-legged deadlifts. Now this involves your posterior chain, which is your lower back, your glutes, and your hamstrings. Let's say for this particular person, their limiting factor is their lower back. Now if they're a bodybuilder, this can become a major problem because they want to fully exhaust their hamstrings and they don't want to have that be limited by their lower back strength. So for them, it would be crucial that they also perform some hamstring isolation exercise afterwards. So perhaps hamstring curls. Whereas if you're a powerlifter or an athlete, this isn't necessarily going to be as big of an issue because you're focusing on a functional movement pattern, on using all of those muscles together. And the thing is, if your lower back is the limiting factor, then that's what's getting the greatest training effect. And for you as an athlete or as a powerlifter, you want to focus on your weaknesses first. So the fact that your hamstrings aren't getting fully exhausted is not really that big of an issue because your hamstrings are clearly already strong enough in comparison to your lower back. So when it comes to exercise selection, the main difference is that with powerlifting, it's a much more minimalist focus. You're just focusing on these main functions and just repeatedly performing them and just getting stronger through those main lifts. Whereas in bodybuilding, you are still focusing on that. You want that to build a base, and especially if you're a beginner, you really should be doing a more powerlifting style program, in my opinion. But as a bodybuilder, you also want to include more specific exercises to make sure certain body parts are the limiting factor in certain movements. To end this video, I want to give a shout out to a channel that is, in my opinion, one of the best fitness channels on YouTube, and that is Sebastian Fitness Solutions. I've mentioned him before, but I want to mention him again because this is very relevant to the information I'm talking about here. On his channel, he uses biomechanics and kinesiology to understand how to optimally target specific muscle groups. So this is really important. As I said, for bodybuilding, you need to be able to focus on specific muscles to optimally develop each body part. And obviously focusing on specific muscle groups can still be effective as a powerlifter or an athlete when it comes to your accessory exercises. As I said earlier, a bodybuilder isn't necessarily going to be performing that many more sets of a particular exercise. Rather, the bodybuilder will simply have a greater variety in terms of how many exercises they have in a given workout. Alright, that's it guys. I hope this video is helpful. Make sure to like the video, support the channel, subscribe if you haven't already, and thanks for watching guys. Peace!
Now when you see my apparel, I got several different levels. Look at my wrist, just levels to these bezels. This whip is mine, but I drive it like I stole it. Flying down the interstate, lighting up a slogan.
But this is the reasoning behind it. So if you think about it, it's a simple modification made to a classic exercise that we're all familiar with, but it will actually allow the resistance